In this session, we will be having a discussion on the treatment of additional information, and we will be understanding what does some of these additional information which is given to us as a part of preparation of cash flow and fund flow really mean, and how should we go about treating them in the books of accounts, especially when it comes to preparation of cash flow and fund flow statement. So in that note, let us start. So the first additional information that we will be discussing is dividend. Before we start, let's have some understanding what is dividend and what is the significance of dividends when it comes to the preparation of cash flow and fund flow. What you have to remember is dividend is the portion of the profit. So for a company to pay dividend, one important prerequisite is that the company should have made profit. So without making profit, a company cannot declare dividend. Okay? So the prerequisite for a company to go about declaring dividend for the appropriate shareholder or the stakeholder in the organization is that they must have made profit. They must have made profit. Without making profit, the company would not be able to declare dividend. Now, for whom is the dividend paid out to? Okay, so or who is eligible to receive dividend? Dividend is usually paid out to the shareholders. Now, who are shareholders? Shareholders are people who have share certificates. They are the ones who have contributed some amount of capital to the company, and in return for the capital that they have contributed, it is a form of monetary compensation. So what happens is, whenever someone picks up shares, okay, whenever somebody buys the shares of a company, what they're entitled to is they're entitled to ownership. They would get ownership, and as a result of this ownership, what happens is they would be able to participate in the decision-making process of the company. The company would be able to take decisions, and then it would enable them to take decisions. And as a result of this, the company would be able to move forward. So there are two things. One thing is that the shareholder is contributing capital. Second thing is that he's contributing his intellect in terms of facilitating decision-making process. Now, for making this contribution, how he would be paid is that he would be compensated with the payment of dividend. So equivalent to the proportion of capital that he has contributed or the shareholder has paid for the company, what will happen is they would be paid dividend. Okay? So equivalent to the proportion of the money that gets contributed, they would be paid dividend. Okay, so this is how we go about with respect to payment of dividend. Okay, this is what happens with respect to payment of dividend. So this is the rationale behind dividend. This is the reason why we would need dividend, and this is the reason why the company would be paying dividend to the shareholders. Now, there are two types of dividend a company ends up paying. One is they would pay interim dividend. Okay, they would pay interim dividend, and next is final dividend. Now let's have a closer look at what these dividends are. So our discussion now would be focused on what are the types of dividend. So the first type of dividend that the company would be dealing with is what is called as interim dividend. And what is interim dividend? As the name suggests, it is a dividend which is paid in interim, okay, or which is paid in between. Okay, so the first type of dividend is interim dividend. So what happens in interim dividend is that interim dividend is the dividend which gets declared in between or during the course of financial year. So we know that in India, the financial year ranges from 1st April until 31st March. So the in between this time frame, the dividend that gets paid out to them is what is called as interim dividend. Then what happens is that after the dividend has been, after this has been prepared, before the preparation of the final financial statement, the company may be periodically preparing interim financial statements. So what happens over there is that they would be they would be preparing it on quarterly basis. They would be preparing it on half yearly basis. So this is what is called as interim financial statements. Okay, this is what is called as interim financial statements. So interim financial statements are usually prepared depending on when the company needs. It could happen on quarterly basis. It could happen on a half yearly basis. But before the preparation of the final dividend, if the company notices that the company is doing exceedingly well, if the company is doing exceedingly well in terms of its financial performance, the company can declare what is called as interim dividend. So one important aspect that you have to remember about the interim dividend is that it does not need the approval of the AGM. What is AGM? Annual General Meeting. It does not need the approval of the AGM, or it does not. This is one such decision that need not be taken at the AGM. So what happens is that the management, they themselves can propose this. It can be approved by the board of directors, and then the dividend would be declared. Interim dividend would be declared. Now, what is AGM? AGM is the consortium, or it is a meeting of all the shareholders of a company. So all the shareholders of a company, they are invited to participate in a common meeting. And at this meeting, what happens is that the discussions are taken up. They will be taking up key decisions one by one. Decision 1, decision 2, it goes on like that. And that is how the dividend gets declared, or the dividend gets paid. Okay. So a couple of things that you have to remember over here is that it does not need the approval of AGM. It is paid during the course of the financial year. You do not have to wait until the financial year to end. So interim dividend, the company notices that they're doing exceedingly well in terms of the financial performance. The company would be declaring an interim dividend, and then this is in order to ensure that the stakeholders or the shareholders of the company, they are extremely happy, or they are extremely satisfied. That is the reason why you would be declaring this dividend. Okay, so interim dividend is what gets paid during the course of the financial year. Now, next type of dividend is what is called as final dividend. Now, what do you mean by final dividend? So, final dividend is a dividend that is paid at the end of the financial year. Okay, the dividend that gets paid at the end of the financial year is what is called as that is what is called as final dividend. Okay, so at the end of the financial year, whatever dividend that gets paid, that is called as final dividend. So final dividend, what happens is you will have to wait until the end of the financial year. Okay, you will have to wait until the end of the financial year. So what happens is at the end of the financial year, the books of accounts all are closed. The company would go about with its audit procedures. They would go about preparing the final accounts. It would have to be, the statements would have to be cross-checked. It would have to be validated. It would have to be scrutinized by the concerned authorities, and then finally it will be approved by the auditor of the company. So this entire procedure is followed, and that is how the company would be going about with regards to the preparation of the final accounts of a firm. Okay, so this is how they will go about with the preparation of final accounts. Now, once this final accounts gets prepared, then what will happen is you will come to understand how much is your total profit. Okay, they will come to know how much is your actual profit. Okay, how much is the total profit that your business has made for that particular year. So based on this, what the company would then do is they would be declaring their dividend. Okay, so this dividend is called as final dividend. So as the name suggests, the dividend that is paid at the end of the financial year, that is called as final dividend. Okay, that is called as final dividend. Okay, so that is final dividend. So interim dividend during the course of the financial year, final dividend at the end of the financial year. So that is what is called as interim dividend and final dividend. Okay, now some more things that you have to remember now is how does the company go about paying its final dividend? So there's a process, there's a procedure. So the reason why you must be knowing this process and procedure is for you to correlate and see why we are going about with the certain treatments. Okay, you have to understand why is it that we are going in this manner, and for you to understand the rationale behind this, that's the reason why we are taking up this entire discussion in this manner. So at first, what happens is the company would be declaring its will be estimating its profit. So how does a company go about estimating its profit? They would be going about with the estimating the profit with the preparation of final accounts. So how does final accounts get prepared? At the end of the financial year, books of accounts are closed, and then based on the books of accounts, the figures, you will be calculating the gross profit, net profit, etc. Then it will go in for a scrutiny, it will be going in for a review, and then what happens is all this is cross-checked, and then finally you will go about with the with the estimation of the profit. Okay, then depending on the profit level, you will go about determining how much should you pay as dividend. Okay, so if the company has made really good, the financial performance of the company is extremely well, then what can happen is you can go about declaring more dividend. If you feel that the company is not doing all that well, then what happens is you could go for no dividend, or you could maybe pay a lesser amount of money as dividend. But the key is that you must know how much of profit your company has made. So what happens usually is that the company must know, it is very important for them to know how much of profit have they actually made. So without knowing the profit, they cannot go about declaring the dividend. So the first thing is that they must know how much of profit the company has made, and this profit estimation can be done with the preparation of final accounts. So with this note, what happens is that depending on the profit, the management would propose the dividend amount. Okay, so depending on the profit, what happens is they will go about determining the, or they will go about proposing the dividend amount. Next thing, what you have to remember is this decision will be tabled before the AGM. This decision to pay dividend, what will happen is it will get tabled before the AGM. Now, what do you mean by tabled? So what happens is the chairman of the company will be calling in for an AGM. All the shareholders the invitation is extended to all the shareholders, and then what happens is that at the shareholders meeting, the chairman of the company, he would stand up, and then he would say, okay, we are taking this decision 1, decision 2, and like that they will go about taking decisions. And then usually what happens is voting would be done. Okay, so what do you mean by voting? So for decision 1, is it a yes or a no? For decision 2, is it a yes or a no? So this is how they will go about taking the decisions. Okay, so should we buy this company, yes or no? Then what happens is depending on that response, they will be taking. So one such decision is the company has made so much of profit, should we declare so much of amount as dividend, yes or no? Okay, so depending on how that turns out to be, the decision to pay dividend or not would be taken. Okay, so this is why an AGM would get convened. Okay, then what happens is depending on how the things turn out to be at the AGM, the company would go about declaring dividend for its shareholders. Okay, so this is the procedure that is followed with respect to payment of dividend in a company. Okay, so this is how they would go about with the payment of dividend in a company. Okay, so this is the payment of dividend, and this is how dividend decisions have been taken, and how the company will be going about with respect to dividend declarations, and how these key decisions have been taken. Okay, so this is the procedure when it comes to with respect to payment of dividend in an organization. Okay, someone has asked me for the previous slide. Okay, now we will be discussing how do we go about treatment of dividend in the fund flow statement. Now, this payment of dividend information, it can be either given to you as an additional information, or it could be given to you directly in the balance sheet, which is mentioned in the question itself. Okay, so there are 2 ways it could be given to you. Either it could be given to you as an additional information. So usually interim dividend, payment of interim dividend, that is usually given as an additional information. Final dividend, proposed dividend, usually these are given as items in the balance sheet. So if the item interim dividend is given, okay, if the item interim dividend is given, then there are 2 things that you could do. One is that you could treat it as you have to treat it both in adjusted profit and loss account, and you will have to treat this as an application in your statement of sources and application. So there are two things you can do. One is that you can treat it as an appropriation in your as a non-operating expense in your adjusted profit and loss account. Second thing that you can do is you can treat it as an application. Next is, if you're given final dividend. Okay, if you're given final dividend, then what do you do? How do you go about with it? If you're given final dividend, year two is treated in your adjustment. Okay, year two is treated in your adjustment. It is treated as an appropriation, and then in your statement of sources and application, it is treated as an application. Proposed dividend. Okay, now proposed dividend, the adjustment is still the same. Year one, it is treated as an application. Year two, it is treated in your adjusted profit and loss account. Okay, so this is how you go about with respect to the treatment of various types of dividends in your fund flow statement. Next, what we will be looking at is how do you go about treating dividend in cash flow statement. So cash flow statement, what happens over here is that if it's given as interim dividend, if it is given as interim dividend, then what happens is interim dividend, it is treated in interim dividend is treated in your both operating as well as in your it is treated both in operating as well as financing activity. So both the places you will have to go about treating it. Okay? So in both the places you will have to go about treating interim dividend. Okay, so in both the places you'll be going about treating this. Okay, so in both the places you must treat this. Then when it comes to final dividend, year two, it will be treated as a operating activity. Year one will be treated as a financing activity. The same goes with proposed dividend as well. So proposed dividend, year two will be treated as an operating activity. Year one will be treated as a financing activity. So this is what happens when it comes to with respect to treatment of dividends, and for that too for cash flow statement. So we've discussed interim dividend, we discussed final dividend, we've also discussed proposed dividend, and this is how we go about with respect to the preparation of interim dividend, final dividend, and proposed dividend when it comes to cash flow statement. So we've spoken about fund flow and we've spoken about cash flow.